I came across your profile. I think it was CTV that did a feature on you a couple of years
Yeah,
ago.
they've run a couple of times. I broke my cardinal rule, which is normally I don't let the outside world in here with video or photography. And the reason is it has nothing to do. Everyone thinks it's, I'm worried about being robbed or whatever. And certainly that's a tiny element of it.
Sure.
But the bigger part is then it's not as much of a surprise when the people that do visit, because there are surprises. I'm on the second floor of a building right now. There's a pre-show that gets you up here, and I'm not going to ruin it. And that's why I wouldn't let CTV cover that part either, is that I needed that when people got here, it was worth their time to come here. I mean, obviously the collection speaks for itself, but I wanted people to see just how much fun I've been having playing in my little sandbox for, 15 plus years. So I broke the rule during COVID because the world was full of such unhappy news and uncertainty. And every time we turned on the news, it wasn't good news. So I decided I would break the rule and let them come in here. And if even that 3-minute story made someone feel a bit happier about their own situation of collecting, and they stopped thinking about that we were in lockdown and what's this COVID, then I was willing to help to do that. So that's how that came about.
Got it. Fantastic, man. No, that's good to know. I just sort of wanted to start from the very beginning. How did you come to be a fan of Indiana Jones, so much so that now you have your own museum per se? So just start from the very beginning, how it all began.
I've told the story many times and everyone gets a good giggle out of it. So let's go through it. It's fun.
Great.
So let's go back to 1981, a week before the premiere of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which would have been June. And I had a friend win a movie ticket on the radio. I had no idea when he called me to say, did you want to come to this premiere of Raiders of the Lost Ark? I didn't know what a premiere was. But more importantly, I said, no, thank you. I've seen the commercials. It's a World War II movie, and that's not my genre. It's not my thing. I never diss somebody else's thing, but I was a sci-fi guy, Star Trek, of course, Star Wars. He's like, oh, no, but it's George Lucas and, Steven Spielberg, Close Encounters. I'm like, I understand that. I know, but it's not my thing. He's like, well, the ticket's going to go to waste. I went, well, just get a refund. And then he explained to me what this premiere ticket was. We get to see it early, a couple of days before it opens, et cetera. And I went, tell you what, if you cannot find anyone, you're right. It would be silly for it to go to waste. Then sure, I will come as your plus one. So we come down to the wire. Nobody wants to take him up on it. And I agree. So we get there, and you could not have a person that was more disinterested in a film. But I sort of took the attitude of, well, it's free. So, okay, sure, why not?
Right.
It was at an old theater here. It's long since gone, called the North Star. And it was unique that it was in the Delta Hotel, and you had to take an escalator down. The entire, if you want to call it, basement of the Delta was the movie theater.
Right.
So as we're coming down this escalator, and there's a reveal, here's this monster, sort of 4 or 5 feet across by 9 foot tall replica in 3D of the Amsel one sheet movie poster. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But I mean, that's my only opinion of it, was because I dabbled in collecting movie collectibles from the theaters, and I'd never seen one of those. They're referred to as standees. I'd never seen one that large.
Right.
So I get my popcorn and my jujubes and whatever it was I got, and we sat down. Well, if you'd had a camera or video, that 2 hours later, as I'm coming out of the theater and my jaw is on the ground because I'm the biggest hard sell there ever would have been. And I was like, what was this? Like, oh my God, who cares about Star Wars? This is the Jim Jam right here. And,
Right.
and I saw it multiple times, over the next coming weeks after it opened and you could buy tickets. And that's where it began. And my first collectible was that theater stand-up, because I went to the theater manager, and you're going to think this has a happy ending. It doesn't. And he absolutely blew me off, like some 16-year-old kid. And he gives me the usual story they used to give, certainly in those days. Oh, this has to go back to the film company. We have to give these back, which I don't know if you're aware is absolute crap. The theater companies do not want
They do not.
Yeah. No, they do not. So I actually ended up working in the film industry for 10 years at Technicolor. I can promise you, the moment we open a movie, it's in our rearview mirror. We do not care. And we're on to the next one that's in front of us, never behind us.
Exactly.
So I'm not a good person that knows. That doesn't mean that, I understand when they have their time and place, but when someone's rude to me and I know they're obviously lying, I'm going to go for the workaround. So it was in the back of my head. And I discovered, which isn't the case anymore, that all the film companies had representation in Winnipeg. They had satellite offices, including Paramount Pictures.
Yep.
So I went up there and introduced myself to the guy, and we were just chatting and discovered we were kindred spirits. He was 6-7 years my senior. He was in his early 20s. And we discovered we had a love of movies and comic books, and we struck up a friendship. And it was months later, because of course Raiders is doing booming business. Those were in the days when we didn't have multiplexes. There's still lineups 2 months later, and we're out for lunch, and I just happened to say off the cuff of, hey, what happens to that stuff? Because the manager told me that, that you guys have to send that back. He's like, why in God's name would we want those back? He's like, why, you want it? I'm like, well, I already asked. He told me no. He goes, oh, he did he? Picks up the phone, calls over and says, hey, it's Blaine from Paramount, and I'm going to need that packed up. We need that to go somewhere else. He hangs up the phone and goes, all right, go get it. So I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to go well. I mean, I'm going to get it, but I don't think that manager is going to be pleased to see who he's giving it to.
For sure.
So I got I didn't drive. I had a friend. I asked, could you please come with, your car? It's fairly big. We get over there. We come in. The manager's there. And I'm like, Blaine sent me over for that stand-up. And he gives me the most laser beam stare ever and goes, you're on your own. We're not helping you. And walks away from me. I'm like, I don't need your help. And that was my first collectible. It sits outside the museum. It greets people as they come up the stairs. But that was my very first piece. And here we are 42 years later.
Wow, that's an incredible story. I mean, that's like a true hardcore movie fan story. And thank you for sharing that, man. You mentioned you worked in Technicolor in the film industry. Just tell me a little bit about that too. I'm quite fascinated by that.
In 1998, my job ceased to exist, downsizing, and they closed. So I guess more of the closing part.
Right.
And I'd been friends with a gentleman named Benny Edelman. He had been in the industry for 50 years. We had been introduced a decade earlier, and I loved I would take Benny to breakfasts on Saturdays just to hear his stories of all that time in the film industry, back when there was silver nitrate film. He was around when that was still around.
Wow.
And telling me all the stories of, the old vaudevillian theaters as they were converted to, modern theater, motion picture theaters. And so it was fascinating, well worth the price of buying him some Salisbury House, breakfast, just to hear his stories. And so I was now unemployed. We were, just having our usual Saturday breakfast, and I said, I'm going to have to start figuring out what I'm going to do, the next phase of my life. And he goes, you want to be a film reviser? And he was a very gruff man. He had a heart of gold, but his people skills might be, considered a bit lacking. But he was a giant teddy bear of a man. And I said, I don't know what a film reviser is. I said, I don't know if I could do it. And he used a tiny expletive and said a monkey could do it. I'm like, well, okay, then I guess the gauntlet is thrown down. If a monkey can do it, show up Monday. Okay. I went, well, I guess I have a job. So I get there Monday, and the lady who had been doing it for almost 40 years was retiring. She had started in her 20s. Had no, Benny being Benny, did not tell her he'd hired someone and that she'd be training the new person, etc. And she sort of did a, who the hell are you? And I'm like, I'm here to be the reviser. And then she was having, poking good fun of, well, I'm the reviser. Are you taking my job? I was like, And then she, said, I'm just messing with you. So I started at the bottom. That is the lowest position in a Technicolor. I mean, we jokingly refer to them as vaults. They don't exist anymore, but we stored all the 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter. And I started just at the tail end while we were destroying the old 16 millimeter film because the schools didn't use it anymore. It was obsolete. So that's where I started. And eventually, by the end of my career there, I was the manager for the prairies for Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Northwestern Ontario. So it was my responsibility every Friday to make sure the film was where it needed to be on time, so that the couple hundred theaters under my umbrella would have their new feature to show. And then it would come back and we would store it until we were given instructions to either send it again or that it would be up for destruction and we would have to, get rid of it.
Wow, that's cool. So pretty much anything that myself and a lot of other people saw, at least in Canada or the regions that you were in terms of Technicolor, came under your supervision. That's really, really cool. Yeah, and it's fascinating that you were telling me about your story of how you would take. Sorry, what was the name of the gentleman to breakfast?
Oh, Benny Edelman. He's since passed, but yeah, Benny Edelman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Late Mr. Benny, and he would tell you these fascinating stories, right? And it's kind of like we're come back a full circle now, where if somebody was to take, let's say, yourself or myself or somebody else, um, 15, 16 years old, and just to hear back about the VHS days, about the early 90s days, how Hollywood was just, it's amazing that how technology evolves every, few generations, every few decades, sorry. And I feel movies, I don't know what you think about movies nowadays. I'm not much of a superhero fan, any at all. And if I watch anything now, with some exceptions, like Avatar, I went to see The Fablemans, Dune, and all those type of films. Other than that, most of the stuff that I watch, I just rewatch 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s films. I don't know how. What do you think about the stuff that's coming out nowadays? Are we getting old, or is it really not as good as it used to be?
Yes, not as good as it used to be. And it's not because we're getting old. As Benny pointed out to me as he was retiring, one of the problems, and I agree with him, is the number of films we now release.
Yeah.
And of course, we have more platforms, but that also means we're out of original ideas, or at least certainly no one's willing to put in let's go back in time. When they announced Temple of Doom, it did not have a date. They said, we are now filming a new Indiana Jones adventure. Yeah. And as they progressed, they eventually said coming 1984, and then it was coming summer of 1984.
Right.
But as the director and everyone involved kept reporting back of, we're getting close, we've got quite a bit in the can, I think we're getting there, then they built a date around that information. And now when they announce a movie, the first thing they do is give you the date, and the pressure on you filmmakers must be absolutely ridiculous. And of course, what's going to happen is compromise. The true vision of that film perhaps isn't going to come to this because there's not the time or the resources. We're hearing right now, to go back to what you said about superheroes, everyone's complaining that the superhero movies are full-time taking up all of the VFX studios. There's nothing left for someone that's a small filmmaker. That every film to some degree has visual effects in it now. Everything that it's next to impossible to not have even just a little bit in there. I'm not saying it's impossible, but a good chunk of the film, certainly Hollywood, films, rely on it. And they're being told, yeah, we'd love to do your film. We can slot you in 4 years. And they're like, pardon me? They're like, yeah, sorry, we're busy on the next 8 Marvel and DC and whatever's. And we'll take your B team. Oh, no, they're taken too. Well, how about your C or D team? Oh, no, they're gone too. And I mean, even this new Ant-Man, I've heard, I haven't seen it yet, but because like you, I have superhero fatigue. I enjoyed them a decade ago when they were fresh and new, and it was something we hadn't seen. We've seen it to death. I'm not saying they're repeating themselves. It's just a formula. How many times can we see either the goody two-shoes superhero, old style Superman, or things as absurd as The Boys or Umbrella Academy on television, where, it's dark and it's whatever, and they've done everything in between, and they just throw a new coat of paint on it. I tell people, if your favorite cereal is Cheerios, and I feed you Cheerios 3 meals a day for 30 days, I promise you, you don't want Cheerios next month. You're tired of it.
100%. Yeah, go on, sir.
And that's where films have gone. And just like you, I tend that when I feel like I'm in a movie watching mood, I go down to my library of almost 2,000 Blu-ray and DVDs and choose something old. Because even though I've seen it a zillion times, it's still fresh and it's new and it entertains me. Whereas a lot of the new stuff, I stopped buying because I went, this was a one-time watch. It wasn't a terrible film. It was just meh. And I'm good. I saw it. I don't need to ever see it again. Or there are the ones where, oh my gosh, that was a tremendous waste of my time. But I used to go to the theater. In 52 weeks, I probably went to the movie probably 40 times. And now I go to the cinema maybe 6 times a year.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with I'm afraid of COVID. It has nothing to do with money or finances. It's most of them I look and go, that doesn't look like anything special to me. You know what? I'll just wait for one of the streamers to get it, and I love the movie going experience. I spent my teens, 20s, and 30s living in the theaters. That was my best perk about working in the film industry. Guess what? As many movies as I wanted to go to the theater for free, and I took advantage of it. But especially as we've gone through this last, I don't know, maybe in the 2000s, really, I hate to sum up like the last 22 years, but there's a couple gems. Like I applauded Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a bit weird in some places, but bravo, fresh, new, trying something out of the box. Full kudos to those people. And I'm glad it's getting recognition, because most of those films, and I'm sure there's many more like it, can't even get the big chains to probably agree to put it on the screen. And they're not getting a fair shake. And that's unfortunate. So I hope that answers your question.
No, 100%, man. I had this conversation with my friends. He's my friend and he's my cinematographer as well. And he said it bang on that Disney, ever since Disney acquired Marvel, I've seen Batman trilogy, the old one. Well, I didn't see all the old Batman movies, like just the first 2 Tim Burton ones, and then the Christopher Nolan ones. I don't even classify all of them as superhero movies, right? They're just in a different part of the world, the way they were done, the way they were executed. But Disney acquiring Marvel and then just putting out immense amount of stuff, and now same thing with the Star Wars, has ruined the film industry. And Matt Damon also said something along the lines of that in the old days, what would happen is if there was a film that studios thought that was not going to do well, they would still greenlight it, but because they would have this time to make the money back on the VHS or DVD releases. But now everything is on stream, and studios can't make that money back. But I hope with that new movie that you're talking about, everything, what was it called? Everything
Everywhere All at Once.
I always forget the title. I mean, I love that film too. I hope that changes the trend, because I have been fatigued with superhero movies for literally last 10 years. I mean, way before probably you did and a lot of other people did, because to me, it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't make me remember anything. Like I remember Jurassic Park. I remember Beverly Hills Cop. I remember A Few Good Men, The Firm, all those films that came in the 90s and the 80s, even 70s, like the Godfather trilogy, the original Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark. You don't remember those characters anymore, or those lines, like the lines that you remember.
That's one of the I said that to a friend, that you realize that in the last 15 or so years, there are really no movies with quotable lines. Yet if you grab into the 80s, there are so many with lines. You just, Army of Darkness, cheesy as it is, with Bruce Campbell, give me some sugar, baby. I mean, it's become a pop culture, and a meme to death. Name me anything from the last 15 years where people are running around. I mean, there's the momentary in the moment, and then it fades. Yet 40 years later, we're still quoting stuff from the 80s.
Yeah. I think after 2005, 2006, things started going downwards. But anyways, I mean, we're kind of going off topic. And now tell me, tell me about your museum, your collection, and you can talk about how it sort of started, and then whenever you feel right, you can just get up and give me a little tour of what you have. And one thing that I saw that in CTV piece that really caught my my eye was your collection of all the different formats, like VHS, and even the was it the 8mm or
they came pre-recorded 8mm.
I didn't even know that such thing existed from studios, but Yeah, that really caught my eye. And but yeah, tell me about the studio, your museum, how it started, and just whenever you feel, just give me a
So in
tour.
2000, 2001, after I left Technicolor, my friend Steve Sansweet in Petaluma, California, just outside San Francisco, he worked for Lucasfilm at the time, and he is the Guinness Book record holding for largest Star Wars collection in the world. They estimate that he has over 500,000 items in 9,000 square feet.
Holy moly.
So I said, I've got nothing to do. I'm on sabbatical, really. I'd been saving up my money. And so I went there for a year to help him get it set up. So I got my teeth, good and chomped on of how do you, what's the proper presentation? Not necessarily museum quality, but, what kind of shelving should you use? Because I always give this advice to collectors, and it's not me being elitist, but make sure that if you're going to invest your money in your collectibles and you want to display them, for goodness sakes, please put some of that money aside on good shelving. Do not buy rickety, Canadian Tire. No diss on Canadian Tire. I mean, it serves its purpose in a shed or something, but
Yeah.
they're rickety, and if you put weight on them, they'll do the sway. You don't want to have multi-$1,000 items on a shelf that could give out on you. So I tell people, as much as you ooh and ah over the museum, its contents, there's tens of thousands of dollars spent on the shelving and the presentation and everything else to make sure that it didn't look like some teenager's closet with a bunch of stuff crammed into it.
Right.
So the museum came about that when I came home, and obviously I'd had contacts down there. I made friends at Lucasfilm more than ever. I was getting indie stuff because, of course, being in San Francisco, in the heart of, where so many Lucasfilm people currently work or have retired, but of course have mementos, and they were aware of me. The best thing that ever happened for me as a collector was the internet. I don't like using the word fame, but there really isn't any other. As I became more famous, more people found me, like you did.
Yeah.
And they reach out for whatever. They're looking to sell me something. They want to interview me, et cetera, et cetera. So when I came home armed with all of this knowledge of and an idea in my head of what I wanted my area to now look like, the next trick was to make that happen, and I couldn't make it happen within the city limits of Winnipeg. So I don't live in Winnipeg. I live from my doorstep to the edge of Winnipeg is 20 minutes probably on the freeway.
Sure.
Because there was no way that, I tried when I lived in the city. I put in zoning variants to double the height of my garage, to double the width of my garage, and everything was turned down. And I understand we have to have, zoning and everything. You can't have people going crazy on their property that could affect the neighbors' resale. But everything I proposed was from an architect and, done proper. And I finally went, then, you know what, I'm going to go somewhere where I can do whatever I want.
Sure.
So just like so many of the American collectors, including Steve, we bought, my wife and I, a former farm. So I'm on 8 acres with a large house with a 3,600 square foot outbuilding that used to be, in the 40s when it was built, it was a functioning farm, and it's a barn. So we took the second floor and built a building inside of a building. So we built a cottage package on the second floor. So it has its own walls, its own roof structure with joists. It has its own floor that sits on top of. So there's joists that are on the floor to raise the whole museum up so that we could insulate it from underneath. Because again, with the minus 30s and 40s, this room needs to be effectively weatherproof. I can't have it get super hot and super cold in here. And so that was 10 months of every weekend, friends who were in the industry, friends who were just willing to swing a hammer or swing a paintbrush or whatever. And we built this thing through the dead of winter. I honestly thought I was going to have people stop showing up. And yet every weekend the crew would show up, even though it was minus 30. And remember, we weren't in a heated room yet. We were building said room. So everybody was, bundled up and trying to work with gloves, and we got through it. And then once it was done, it was okay, interior. And we were very specific about colors, the type of carpet, everything. None of it was by accident. None of it was done as remnants or anything like that. It was, And if we need to pause while we catch our breath on money, then we do that. We don't settle. Then we pause till, you know, another paycheck is available or a couple paychecks, and we can now order the whatever it was, carpet or whatever. And then, of course, once that was done, then we started taking everything out of storage, because most of it was in storage with a small area in our house in Winnipeg in the basement, which is usually where collectors end up. And it all was then brought, and I was actually pretty proud of us. We didn't have to move things around. We'd planned it pretty well, that everything that we dropped into place went, yep, that's exactly how I thought it was going to be in my head. And we moved on until it was done. And then we had to sit down, my wife and I, and decide who's going to be allowed to see this, because I wanted, it would be very selfish to build this wonderful playground and then not share it with others. And it has nothing to do with bragging or whatever. Again, I love, my favorite part now of the collection is watching people like you and others when they visit, and the look on their face. And I watch a 60-year-old man and I can see the 6-year-old in him on his face. That to me is worth more than anything in the world, is bringing smiles to people's faces. Even when I have a spouse that comes with, you know, usually it's the husband that wants to see, but not always. And the wife tags along. And at the end of it, they will say to me almost always, you know what? I'm not really so into this, you know, my husband is and whatever, but oh my gosh, what you and your wife have done here, I had a delightful time. I felt like, you know, a youngster again, you know, it was a wonderful afternoon. And I now realize jokingly that I've gotten off easy because my husband's a lightweight compared to you. And I've always been complaining about his, you know, excessive purchases. And now I feel so much better. And, you know, and we have a good laugh over it, of course.
Right.
And people have pretty much decided that my wife is a saint. And I cannot dispute that. She has been with me every step of the way. She is very supportive. And I'm aware this is not her Jim Jam. She has her own thing. She does high-end Barbies, you know, from 30, 40 years ago to current. That's her thing. And when I support her in her hobby, when we're somewhere and she wants to go to some shop that has vintage Barbies, I, of course, say, well, give me the directions. Let's Google it. Let's get you there. Let's see if there's treasures for you. You know, so, and, you know, and that's probably explains why we're coming up on, you know, we're approaching 20 years of marriage. We're not there yet, but we're pretty close. So that's how the museum came about. And so the rule was friends and family could attend the museum, or someone recommended by friends or family. And that we asked that the two rules are when they visit is that please don't say where I live, because that is for security reasons.
Sure.
And please don't post excessive amounts of photos on social media, because it will ruin it for the next people that might have been invited to come. And what's the point of coming if you could just watch some video that showed you every nook and cranny of the place?
Yeah.
And I made an exception, and I'm doing it again shortly. I'm going to do an open Zoom call and allow a certain number of people, with my priority being overseas people. You know, that it's unlikely they're going to spend airfare to come to Winnipeg, Manitoba, to come here. Although we did have someone stop in from Australia, so that was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And they were delightful, husband and wife. They spent the whole afternoon. We chatted about, you know, similarities and differences in collecting and things culturally between Australia. It was a wonderful. I was so glad to meet them. And that's my favorite part, is meeting fellow fans. That's why I love the movies. That's why I love collecting, is it creates connection to other people. I've always said that movies can never go away, because it is the only thing you are guaranteed that is safe to shyly and riskily ask someone out on a date for the first time, because it isn't a big give. If I ask you to a supper and I'm looking to get to know you, you might say no, because, well, what are we going to talk about?
Exactly.
What if it turns out you really don't care for me at all, and now you're trapped because you don't want to be rude, presumably. Whereas a movie, you say hello, thanks for, you know, and you get the treats, and now you watch the film. And when it's done, you have something to talk about. Let's go for coffee, which isn't a big ask. That obviously, if the person was interested in you enough of, let's see where this goes, then you're going to go for that coffee and you know, a donut and chat. And if all of that went well, as you then segue from talking about the movie to similar taste, then perhaps that leads to, would you like to go out again? And so, and it will run its natural course, whatever. I tell
Yeah.
people, what other thing do we have that is the safe, back in the, the 50s, I guess it was, my mom said, one of the things you would do is ask someone to go bowling. Well, we don't really do. I'm not saying bowling is gone, but I don't think it's quite the social situation it was 60, 70 years ago.
Right.
So I love that about the film. I own a toy store that we run part-time now from Wednesdays to Sundays.
Sure.
And I tell everybody, my only rule is when you come through the doors, I don't want to talk about the news. I don't want to talk about where you stand on politics or COVID or anything. We are here for nerd talk. Talk about Last of Us that you just watched. Talk about movies you just saw. Talk about comic books. This is a happy space, because the bad stuff's waiting for us on the other side of the door. Let's take a break from that.
And that's so true, right? Because in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, pretty much everything that people talk about is where you stand on COVID, where you stand on the political side. And people fail to realize, even though it's a common knowledge thing, and it's a cliche, that the idea, if you talk to somebody about arts, it doesn't have to be movie, it could be Broadway, it could be book, it could be music. You can disagree on that, but at the same time, it's something that's very creative, and it doesn't drive you to that passion, as, let's say, you're political or you're religious or whatever beliefs that you may have. And we lacked it, and I wish that came back. And I'm so glad you mentioned you have that rule in the store, because I think COVID really messed up all of us, where every time we would constantly talk about all these, where do we stand on COVID, where do we stand on politics, left, right, or whatnot. But I'm glad now people are realizing it's gone away, because it actually is detrimental to your own health when you start talking about these things all the time. And movies are one thing, and entertainment and art is that it just takes you into another dimension. That's how I like to put it. Like, you're in a completely different world, and you are completely, and people like us, like, who love movies, we are just totally at our 100%, 100% how we are, how we're supposed to be, as opposed to be, if we're talking about politics or something, we're not truly ourselves. So it's awesome that you have that rule. And I really like your story about your wife having a Barbie collection. It's so interesting. Obviously, this, that Barbie has a movie coming out this year, right?
Yep.
And there's an Indiana Jones movie coming out this year as well.
Yeah, no, we're well represented in the cinema in 2023.
Yeah, so how is that journey for your wife, and obviously for yourself as well, with both these films coming out as a couple, and as movie fans and collectibles items?
Unfortunately, it goes back to where we began our conversation of, and I've told people, of course I'll go see the new Indiana Jones, but I'm going to be the unpopular guy that says, I don't know that we need one. It ended perfectly at number 4. Whether you like number 4 or not, that's an entirely a whole different video thing we could do. But I mean, Hollywood doesn't make movies because we had a good idea, let's do it. We need to make another Indiana Jones, quick, hire a whole bunch of people. We need a story. It's like, how about you add the story first, and then you announce, we think we've got a really good, nut to crack here, and here it is. And then they get the funding and the whatever. And instead it's the horse before the cart trick once again, with horrible pressure on the filmmakers and everyone involved. I hope I like it. I hope it's good. I hope it isn't embarrassing that, Harrison Ford is 80 years old, but going on an adventure, that we're once again retreading and recycling instead of something fresh or new. Why couldn't we have a fresh, new adventure style? I mean, serials were around where George and Stephen borrowed from the 40s and 50s from their youth.
Yeah.
And they invented a new character, swashbuckling, roguish sort of fellow that lives in a gray area sometime. You're telling me someone, couldn't have a new spin without it having to be Indiana? They're so fixated on the only thing we can tell stories about is already existing pop culture. Barbie, Indiana Jones, Super Mario, they're all Last of Us, which I love the video game, and I am enjoying the show. And at least the show took chances, and I don't know what's coming, even though I've played the game so many times, because they made enough original content that it's interesting.
Well,
But
it's because that its original stuff takes time and effort to make as opposed to established franchise, right? And you mentioned about Indiana Jones 4 being, for you, it was a great closure. For me, the third one was a great closure.
it was, I agree with you. He rode off literally into the sunset.
Yeah, and Spielberg has been quoted to saying that I literally had that shot for the purpose that's it. And I believe there's no official confirmation to this. It took them 19 years to make the fourth one, because I remember when I used to run DreamWorks fan site, and Giles and I started the Radar.net, we would speculate that when is it going to come out? When is it going to come out? And I believe that Spielberg never wanted to do the fourth one. And I think Lucas, being his friend, kind of pushed him, and he finally gave in. Hey, I don't know, I could be dead wrong about that. And I also think that's the reason that he's not doing the fifth one, because I'm not excited about it as I was for the first three, but I'll give it a chance.
Yeah, I mean, and the only reason I'm willing, I mean, originally when everything was just announced that there was one coming, I wasn't negative. I was just sort of roll my eyes of, here's the Hollywood machine cranking out something that probably shouldn't get made. And it was only when they said who the director was that I went, all right, now I'm interested. I'm curious, because I don't even like racing car movies, and I loved Ford versus Ferrari. Loved it.
That was a great film.
Fantastic performances, great cinematography. Everything about it kept me engaged, that I forgot that I don't even like those kind of movies, and became fully immersed in it and couldn't stop talking about it. I was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. I love Logan.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, that's not a superhero movie. That's not a superhero movie that I really enjoyed, because it had nothing to do with X-Men, right? It was just a one-off film, and
it was character driven.
Yeah.
Instead of the big explosions and the world-threatening aliens and buildings and everything's falling into the big crack in the earth, it was just characters. It was, and they had to get by on their performance and their dialogue more than anything. There's really not oodles of action in Logan. It's a lot of this sad what happens to a superhero when they get to the end of their superheroing, and I love that film, as dark as it is, and doesn't paint a rosy ending for poor Wolverine. It's a fantastic film. Again, well shot, well directed, well acted, everything about it. So I went, you know what, if this guy's doing an Indiana Jones, you've got my interest. Let's, and then they started announcing the cast, and I went, okay, yeah, I like Mads Mikkelsen. Yep, those are good people. All right, let's see what they're going to do. And maybe the fresh eyes is what we need. That, that maybe George and Steven had gotten a little too close to the subject matter, and they're now doomed to just repeat themselves. So let's see what someone new can do with the character. And I guess we'll find out in a few months whether I be careful what I wish for or not, I guess.
Yeah, 100%, man. If you are ready right now to give us a little tour, whatever you see fit, we're all set to go.
I'm sitting at the desk, so I'll go to the entrance and then start walking my way as if I had just come through the door. So when someone comes through the door, this is what they would see.
Holy moly, look at those games.
So those are, we'll go that way. So these are all stand-up VLTs from Britain that I bought from different pubs, and then had them crated and shipped over. The one on the far left has stopped working because it needs 240 volts. So I got to find someone that knows something about that. But obviously the other two are working just fine. This is all of the crew hats and commercial hats you can buy, or anything that's sort of clothing related. There's the Sankara stones. You can see they're busy blinking away.
Yeah,
and if I remove one, then they go dead.
Oh, wow.
And then as soon as you put them back in their base, they'll come back to life again.
Were they used in the film, or are these replicas?
They're replicas. Down here is a massive display. So that would be 4 feet left to right. I can't even know there. I guess
I can see it. See it.
So that's all the Lego sets, and these were placed into Toys R Us's with the pre-builds in them, so that obviously the kid would, you know, see them. There's the little placards that then tell you what set number that is, and the mom would just look for the, you know, the proper set on the shelf and grab it. So we'll
Wow.
go down this wall, artwork up on the walls. That's another Lego display from Germany, so it requires 240. That's a plaster cast off the Indiana Jones, I guess you call it animatronic at the Disney rides, and I just threw a fedora on his head. Replica of course, the Grail tablet, replica of the Grail Knight's shield.
Dude,
The book,
you're insane, but it's really good.
the book. My wife, she just found a really cool knight helmet and gifted me that for Christmas, because sometimes we'll throw things in here. They have nothing to do with Indiana Jones,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they're sort of things we think he would like find or want to preserve. The painting in his dad's house that shows the Grail Knight going for the walk. That is, if I turn this sideways, will that work? Let's see. Yeah, I guess so. That is a screen used uniform from Crystal Skull. That's a screen used uniform from Last Crusade, in the scene where Indy goes to Berlin.
Right, right. Can you actually just go back the other way, just because it's
Yep.
gonna be hard? Yeah, but yeah. Wow. Look at that. So
Funko.
sorry, go on.
No, a beautiful, well, I should start with, I guess, this one. So a fellow named Ron Hembling from Australia does these custom dioramas, and this one he put in a crate of Indy running from the boulder.
Oh
And
my
that's
goodness.
and that's a 3 3/4 inch figure. Hopefully we're getting some of that. Oh, where are we here? Oh, there we go.
Look at that.
And he's running from the boulder. And so I joked with Ron for years of, oh my God, I love that. It's one of my favorite pieces. All I would need it is in Barbie size, meaning 12-inch instead of 3 3/4. And one day this showed up. So that's a 12-inch Indiana Jones running in the crate from a boulder. The thing is, it cost me a small fortune in shipping to get it from Australia.
Right, I bet.
Prototype of a VHS DVD display for Walmart that never went into production. This was the prototype that would have been made, and then Walmart changed their mind. More Lego displays from Target and Walmart in the States, the pre-builds, all the Lego, of course, up above. Everything in here, to give you an idea, is 10-foot ceiling. So all these shelving units that you see go to the ceiling means that's 10-foot worth of stuff. That's all the food product, meaning one of every package I could ever find from any brand of food that had Indiana Jones on it. So as we go down back to this wall again, it's a VLT from Japan on the right. And then the next two are pachinko machines from Japan. One in demonstration mode that you can see the little video playing on it.
Yeah.
And then the one on the left is actually a functioning one. The one on the right, because they had different backgrounds, so of course I had to have them both, is playable. And then the other one is just in demonstration mode. Another proposed DVD display that wasn't made, that you and I, the customer, would walk between the arches there and you could see the fake little DVDs on the shelf. And here is, this is everything. It's the only area that got its own spot, is that the Japanese love Indiana Jones, and it never went away the way it did over here for a long time. There was always new merch, and especially at the Disney parks. So it ended up with its own area that's just Japanese items from the different Disney parks on those shelves.
Well, the Japanese are actually huge fans of Steven Spielberg. Like, they have a huge fan base over there.
Yep. This one is all the way up at the top to sleeping bags and some figures, toys, and then it's puzzles, and then miscellaneous concession and whatever. Over here was just some fun different pieces I liked, either mini busts or things like that. Down here is all the magazines, comics. I can back up. And trading cards and everything in their boxes and binders, etc. Just the sketch cards alone, I think I own upwards of 500 original sketch cards from the trading cards. Of course, the part that people love is the Williams pinball machine. It's currently got artwork being flattened on it, but it's fully functional. An original 1984 Atari arcade machine. I just didn't turn
Wow.
it on because it's very loud. Over here are the map files, or otherwise known as architect map drawers. So there are 10 drawers with well over 500 posters. This is all new stuff that's come in. That in here it tends to get messy in the winter because I don't have a lot of visitors for good reason. So that gives me time to really start organizing and whatever. You know, I cleaned up as quick as I could for you today, so it wouldn't have things like literally everywhere. But that's all new posters and whatever. My one Star Wars item that I allowed in here is there's a life-size R2-D2.
Nice.
Books, and then my other sub collection is Uncharted, which of course was inspired by Indiana Jones. So there's shelves of that or Tomb Raider. Sort of Uncharted ended up over here.
Crazy. Wow, man, I'm impressed. I mean,
There's
I've
a
seen
piece.
it,
There's a
but
piece on the wall there. If you can see, that's George sitting in his desk, and
yeah.
he's absolutely surrounded by tons of his characters and creations. And originally the art didn't sell well, but he loves the artist. So the little change they made is George decided he'd sign them all, and they sold out in like 2 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So that is George's signature there.
Nice.
That's a poster for the pachinko machine sitting on top of R2. So then if we come back the way we came, there is all of every figure, toy, and play set in every variation from every year from 82. The only thing I don't have are these sets right here are from Spain, that the figure is the same, but they did a pack in with different accessories, and they're so expensive that I made the decision that I just didn't need them all to effectively replicate, other than they were just changing some of the pack-ins. Down there is things like lunch boxes, wallets, knickknacks like that, and then that's all the figures. When we come around this way, that's every single video game, to my knowledge, ever made in every format, in every size, because they're buried behind each other in every different language that I've ever been able to get each one in, or if it was a reviewer's promo copy or anything like that. Most of the Disney high-end and limited edition statues from either Japan, Walt Disney World, or California, Anaheim. As we come around the corner, we're back to the Japanese area again. And then the area that you were very enthusiastic about, because it'd be mean of me if I didn't show it to you. There we go. Let's open it wide. I don't think they covered it wide. And there is every format of media that has been released on, including VCD, the 8mm, Beta, Super VHS, which was a format that only existed briefly for like 6
Yeah.
months
Yeah.
and went bye-bye. Beta's sitting next to it. Promo copies, ones with pack-ins that, you know, from Blu-ray or 4K or Steelbooks or whatever. I don't even know where the 8mm. Oh, there they are. Sorry.
Nice.
There's the 8mm. So the idea was, you of course were traveling with your camcorder. It had audio and video outs. You would plug into the hotel TV when you were there, and that way you could watch movies while you were there.
It's kind of like equivalent to Chromecast for Apple TV nowadays.
Yeah. The clothing, which is plentiful there, and it's all organized by either, again, Japan has its own area because it was actually a brand name in Japan. The brand was called IJ and was inspired by Indiana Jones. So that whole area has its own section. After that, they're broken up by movie or by format. Like over here is anything that's, I think that says video game there. Yeah. So that's every shirt that had something to do with video game related for Indiana Jones. All of the drinking cups, every version of every kind, mostly commercial. Occasionally there'll be one that's a fan one, and I just like it a lot, and I'll get it. There's my Muppet from a friend of mine who,
Oh, nice.
so I have my own Muppet of him. Prototypes and things in the glass case. That's the entrance where we came in. And then this cabinet here with the high-end stuff or original props used from the film. That thing in black next to so that Blu-ray set doesn't exist. That was what they proposed it should look like, but it didn't. The Sean Connery next to it is actually the special effects little puppet of him when he's in the biplane in Last Crusade. That was screen used. Just those are replicas. Very expensive replica of Harrison's statue that sits, I don't know, it's got to be 2 feet tall. A diorama of Sala throwing down, and if you come down below the shelf, and then of course there's Indy with the rest of it to get pulled up through the hole. A custom of Indy and his dad on the motorcycle in 12-inch size.
I love that. I love that.
One of the 10 models that was used to sell to the Disney executives, that is an exact replica in full 3-dimensional. I can take the glass off and remove the sections. That is the entire ride at Disneyland. And
Wow.
they used this to pitch the idea to get their $30 million to build it back in the 90s. High-end stuff from the anniversary when the ride hits, I want to say 20 years old, I think it was. This was the stuff that was for sale that one night only. More statues and things that are available. My pride and joy, one of the prototype maquettes from ILM of the Ark of the Covenant for the scene at the end when it shoots into the sky when everyone's getting vaporized.
Yeah.
Harrison's hat from Crystal Skull. It is not screen used. It was the backup hat with provenance that I have for it. So trivia for your listeners is that when he's Professor Jones, his fedora is always gray. When he is Indiana Jones, the adventurer, his fedora is always brown. But if you pay attention, anytime that he's in a suit and he's not adventuring, his hat is gray.
Great. Yeah, 100%.
Again, different.
Oh, is that the monkey brain?
Yep.
Nice.
Right there.
Sweet.
A wonderful painting that a guy does that I just thought was fantastic, that obviously paying homage to Norman Rockwell, proposing the first time that Indy takes Short Round off the street and buys him a meal because he's a homeless kid. Right. I just thought it was great. Whip, machete, the Disney poster when the ride first opened. And then, of course, the photo moment that everybody loves is the life-size statue from Germany that was in the DVD stores. When it came to DVD for the first time, there was roughly 300 of these made by a company out of Australia. And this would greet you at the entrance to tell you that, you know, they had it in stock and it was now on DVD for the first time. Everybody has to get their picture taken with that when they visit. Understand? That's why I left it there. I actually only brought it in here to assemble it. It was going to be part of the pre-show, and everybody, because it was still the colder time. Can I get my picture? And they always whisper. I always find that funny, like it's a library. You know, would it be okay if I get my picture? Over here, school supplies, things like that, binders, all of that sort of stuff. Stuff I'm sorting on a chair, a replica of Mutt's sword from Crystal Skull. I always let the little 5-year-old kids whoosh it around, and they absolutely think that's the greatest thing ever. Some prototypes of stuff that didn't get made for toys and otherwise. All the way down in that cabinet, a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, and I think that's the scale to go with 1/6. And then my pride and joy, the library, which is the books, and I can't remember, I want to say something like 15 different languages.
Wow.
I have them in Arabic, I have them in Russian, Chinese, Korean, French, English, German, Russian. This is one of my favorites, especially when I can't even read the language.
That's Hebrew, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So everything is organized by language on the shelves, media kits, that sort of thing. All the laser discs and record albums and that sort of thing are down over here. This is piles of stuff I need to organize from the last 6 months that I'm busy working on. And that pretty much takes you 360 degrees around.
Fantastic, man.
The whole place.
That is super cool. Thanks for giving us the tour. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, there are some things obviously stuck out for me more than others, just for personal reasons. I mean, we all have different likes, but it was really cool. I'm just baffled that the amount of obviously time that it took not to only to find, not to just to bring it in, but just to do research and, constantly adding to your collection. But also, I mean, not that I want to know, I mean, you must have spent an immense amount of dollars on all these items just to get them in.
It's funny that that comes up more than you would think, and people are always sort of surprised. I think the answer is I have no idea, because
No,
on any one item, I probably will remember, ballpark what I paid, but I never documented that part of it because it didn't matter. It's not for sale. I mean, at some point, sure, I guess if, one day we have to make the announcement, I need to move to a care home or a smaller situation for health and age, I guess I will have to worry about that then. But certainly, individually, let me do this.
but I think it's great that you don't have a number, because that reflects the actual love that you have for what you're doing, because otherwise it becomes a business, right?
Sorry. So that is a bronze statue that weighs 75 pounds
Wow.
that they only made 10 of. And I think I have number 4, I believe. I know what I paid for that because it's god awful. But most of the time, I don't really keep track.
I bet. And has anyone from Lucasfilm, or even the powers that be, have they, do they know about it? I mean, when I say Lucasfilm, I mean like people at the top. Whether it's George Lucas, Kathleen Kennedy, or Steven Spielberg, or Harrison Ford. Do they know about the existence of this museum? And if so, have they ever shown any interest in just taking a peek at it?
I'll answer the second part first, which is none of them have shown an interest. That they don't even care about Steve's Star Wars one. The fandom part, they're appreciative, they're fans, and that they're passionate and that they love it. But to them, it was their job, and they made that film, and they're ecstatic and over the moon that we loved it, and it sort of ends there. And that's fine. Spielberg knows about it. I know that because he sent me a cease and desist for my logo being a little too close to the Indiana Jones logo, because I had written him to ask, to explain what the museum was, and that I was working on trying to get autographs from the key people to be able to put up here at the museum. And the response I got was a cease and desist because of the logo on the letterhead. Could have at least sent me the autographs. That would have been nice. But no, I just got a cease and desist. So we changed the logo. That's fine. That's, if I was in the wrong, I'm not going to argue that. We changed it. And then I decided, because you'll remember to the beginning of our conversation where I'm not so good at no's. So I then decided, if we're going to do that, I'm going to write to you every 3 months. And for 2 years, every 3 months, I sent a new package with the new logo and the new letterhead, explaining who we were and that I would really love for him and Kate Capshaw if they could sign the enclosed photos so we could, add them to the museum walls. And when 3 months would go by and I heard nothing, which I felt was adequate time, I would send again. And at the end of 2 years, I kid you not, I get a phone call that starts with an 818 area code. And I know what that is. That's Hollywood, basically. And I went, that's odd. And I picked it up. And the lady introduced herself and said that she was the personal assistant to Steven Spielberg, and that they were calling to confirm my address so that they could return my signed photos from Mr. Spielberg and Ms. Capshaw, and that they would be FedExing them. And I said, oh, no, you can't FedEx to that address. That's my post office box. Let me give you my home address where FedEx will bring them. Over the moon of this. And at first I thought someone was messing with me, but then I went, I haven't told anyone I'm doing this. So none of my friends could be pulling a prank, because I don't ever tell people when I'm mailing away for autographs. And how would they be faking an 818 number? So no, I think this is actually real. And I gave her the address, and she said, fantastic. Those will be going out today. You should receive them tomorrow. And can we now please expect this matter to be closed? So I guess she had been the one getting my mail 4 times a year for the last 2 years. And I guess they decided that, my persistence, that maybe the best way to make me go away would just be to actually sign the 2 photos. And I said, by all means, tell them thank you very much. I much appreciate it. And sure enough, FedEx came the next day with an envelope addressed from Amblin Entertainment, and there were my 2 signed photos.
When was this?
So, what are we in now? 23. That's probably about 10 years ago or so.
Okay.
So in at least a peripheral way, he certainly knew about us. I don't believe George, I mean, he has nothing to do with Indiana Jones now anyway.
Yeah.
I don't believe he knows about it. I doubt Harrison does. He's not big on the fandom thing. That's why he doesn't do Comic Cons and that sort of thing. So I, again, he's never rude about it. He'd be that. I'm glad that these films brought you joy, but that's about it.
And I think you're right about that fact too, that, because sometimes you spend so much time on these films, like especially Indiana Jones. It just kind of, I don't know what the right word would be, but it just kind of wears off the novelty for them. And they, like you said, they move on to the next project.
Yeah.
Maybe down the road, and even at this age now, like, Spielberg is in the mid-70s. I think Lucas is around the same age. Harrison Ford is 80. I think you have other things to think about what time I have left, and how am I gonna make it useful as opposed to what I've done. And I think what they wanted to do, they've already achieved, which is like create something that leaves an impact. I mean, films like Star Wars, Back to the Future, Jaws, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, like these are films that will be remembered for long time, if everything else is even forgotten. Not because they were great films when they came out or even when they are right now, just because the amount of fandom it has. It's just amazing. But yeah, man, no, this is cool. What do you, I wanted to know what are your plans now that new Indiana Jones movies coming out? I mean, there's already announcements of tons of new toys. There'll be Lego, there'll be like statues, obviously, when the DVD comes out. Are you planning to continue to grow it, or what's your plan, if that's something you're willing to share?
I am. I've soul searched and had discussions with my wife so I will be 60 next year. And I now need to start thinking about, maybe not tomorrow, but it's certainly now on our radar of, we will be at some point having to embrace the next stages of our lives, which likely, as my in-laws did recently, mean downsizing and leaving. Right now I'm physically capable to take care of 8 acres and the grass and the snow and the maintenance.
Sure.
But as I get older, that may become difficult, or hopefully not, but impossible. So when I knew that I had my whole life ahead of me to enjoy the stuff, nothing stopped me from buying anything, other than if it was, if it's an original, like, one of Harrison's hats sold for 50,000. Well, I don't play in that sandbox. I don't make that kind of money. But if it was the kind of things you saw around you, when I gave you the tour, just minutes ago,
right,
the sky was the limit. I had no problems, to acquire those, because I had my whole life ahead of me to enjoy them. Well,
sure.
I now have more years behind me than in front of me. And so, to answer your question, if it's something that all it's really doing is replicating what came before for merchandise, I'm likely going to pass. So an example, Hasbro has announced the new figures and they look fabulous, but they're also doing the retro figures, which they've done for Star Wars, where it's simply an exact replica with a minor modification to the package, so it can't be passed off as an original, of those figures from 1982, which, by the way, didn't sell. They were a huge disappointment and financial disaster for Kenner, and ended up being cleared at a chain called KB Toys and Hobbies in the USA for like 99 cents a figure. They didn't sell at all. They didn't even come to Canada. So why would I buy reproductions of those when I own the originals? I own all of them. Sure. So I'm likely going to pass. On the other hand, they're now doing, because of course that's the new norm, is 6-inch action figures. That's sort of the size, for you and I, we grew up with 3 3/4 inch. That was the norm. But now for the young people today, they're used to the 6-inch figure, 6 and 9. So they're doing something called the Adventure series, which of course have better paint jobs and better sculpts and more points of articulation, et cetera, et cetera. Those look fabulous. Statues, if it's just another statue of Indy running from a boulder, I will not likely partake. It would be a case by case basis, but when it's stuff that really it's just another representation of what I've already got and is not uniquely different enough, probably going to pass. Clothing, you know, Crystal Skull just about bankrupted me on the number of shirts and hats and scarves and toques and whatever. They were all the same imagery, just slightly, you know, tinkered with. As you know, one of them was, you know, that it's a pattern that repeated on like a Hawaiian style shirt, you know, as opposed to just the one image on the back, you know, and I bought all of them. So I'm like, you know what, if it's a shirt and I like it and it's unique and I can wear it, I'll buy it. But I'm not going to be all in for every hat and every shirt and every piece of clothing they do. Artwork, I tend to, I mean, those map drawers back there have $500 or $600 posters that are either art prints, original art from the artist, etc. I try to, whenever I can, if I can afford it, buy the original art. That's one of the things that makes me sad in this digital age, is there's been some fabulous new Indiana Jones art, and I reach out to the artist who says, sorry, I did that on an iPad. It's all digital. There is no original. I can make you a print. I don't want the print. I want to be able to say, I own the original. That, you know, there's only one Picasso. We can all buy a print of a Picasso,
right?
But there's something special about the bragging rights. In this case, it is about bragging to say, I loved it so much and it spoke to me so much. A reproduction was not good enough. I needed to own the original. And now that's not even possible. And that's sad to me. You know, because a print, you know, it never captures what the original has, no matter how much they try.
100%. Same thing goes for the book. You know, it's like that feel. I even think same thing with DVDs and VHS, and then, you know, 16 millimeters or 35 millimeter. Like everything is digital. You don't value it. Like, you know, like you have like 20,000 Blu-ray DVDs. I don't have that big of a collection, but I have a fairly big size. But to know that there is a DVD sitting on a shelf or a book, as opposed to it's somewhere on the cloud, you know, it's two different things.
Our house, it's a 3-bedroom house. One of the bedrooms, because it's just the two of us, is a library full of nothing but bookshelves top to bottom with books, hardcovers, soft covers, you know, everything in between, coffee table books. I love, which is why I love the library here in the museum. I love books. I love being able to sit down, warm cup of hot chocolate, and flip through a book. You know, maybe that just makes me an old fart, but I'm okay with that.
No, I think books and DVDs and all those tangible things are completely priceless. And so let's just one last question for you. You mentioned that, you know, obviously down the road things you'll have to assess, and, you know, when life moves forward, you have to reevaluate stuff. Whenever that is, and I hope it happens whenever it's supposed to happen for you, would you prefer to pass it on to someone as a massive collection by itself, like a museum, or would
Yes.
you? Okay, good.
Only because it's heartbreaking to me that 42 years later I mean, I get offers already. People have said, well, if you're thinking about downsizing, you know, there's some pieces I would love. And I go, I'll keep that in mind. But to spend 42 years to assemble it all together with over 9,000 items plus and counting in here, to then just cast it all into the wind again, just seems a shame. And it may come to that, and that will be unfortunate. But I would rather that someone else, if they had deep enough pockets, would say, you know what, box it all up, and here's the number we've agreed on, and let's get a 53-foot semi in your driveway, and let's get it on its way to its new home. That would be delightful. And I would love for that. You know, and I would work with that person 150% to help them get it there. Any questions they have, any provenance or stories they need behind certain items, 100% I would be on board for that. I just worry that, you know, in these economic times and otherwise, I don't know that will be a reality, but I can hope.
But do you feel that now with Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny coming out, which presumably would be the last Indiana Jones film for a while, at least, if not at all, at least that's what Lucasfilm has said. Maybe if because, you know, the excitement level will be there. If you do get an offer that you like, would you partay with it this year or next year?
Yeah. Yeah. My wife and I have said that if the right person knocked on the doorway, you know, there's Prop Store of London. I've let them know that if they, you know, in their portfolio of customers that have deep pockets that bid on some of their items, that if they thought they might have someone lined up and, you know, and they need to take a commission or whatever, but they could make it happen as, because I mean, I could send the whole thing to them and they'd just auction it
Yeah,
off in pieces. But I
yeah,
would rather it stay together.
yeah.
Um, but I guess circumstance will dictate how it's going to play out at the time when we finally say, okay, you know, these items, you know, they're going to eBay or auction sites or whatever. And I know, you know, I know that model that I showed you from the Disney ride, one sold years ago and it went for $10,000.
Jeez.
So, you know, likely I probably should be able to expect I'd get at least 10,000, and I have more to go with mine, including Providence from the model maker that they did not have with that one that they sold at auction. So, you know,
I
I already know the valuable items, and I know the items that people will likely want to snap up right away. It's well, that doesn't help me that if we have to move and I've still got, I'm going to make up a number, you know, 500 cases packed up, where are they going to go? Like, I'm not going to pay to rent a storage facility to just let them sit in there, where accidents happen all the time in those situations. Water, you know, rodents, bugs. You know, so if I'm out, I'd rather be all out.
I think I genuinely feel that you might get like an all out offer sometime this year, because it just depends how the excitement level. I mean, I think the excitement level, of course, among the fans is great, but depending on how the film does with the audience, not necessarily the box office, but just in terms of the admiration from the fan, you probably will. Beyond this year, I don't know, unless there's more Indiana Jones stuff planned, but I think you're at the right time at the right place, and I hope that the right thing happens.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I will be sad, just like, you know,
Oh,
a
I know.
child leaving off to go to college. It's such a huge part of my life. But just like I watch my in-laws go through, it is what it is. That as we, you know, get older in our situation, we now have to get ready for a different phase of our lives. I've known all along that reality. I mean, this museum is bigger than the first house I owned as a young man. My first house was 900 square feet. This place is 1,200 square feet with 10-foot ceilings. And there's more than what's inside this museum, because anything that's store displays are in storage on the other side of the room here in another room, because there's just no way to display those things. They're too big. That's why even the theater display isn't in here. I can actually, here, I will let you look outside the door.
Sure.
We're on the second floor. People always forget that because they think that. So there's the theater display as you come up the stairs. So that thing is roughly 5 feet across, 9 feet high. And there's other small displays in that as you're coming in. That's the only place I can show those. And this barn has a rounded ceiling for the real barn. The museum has a flat, but the real one here is that it's a curved barn. And then, I don't know if you can see,
Yeah,
that's the Ark of the Covenant life size down there on your way up the stairs.
Amazing. Amazing. There was a game that came out in the late 90s that I used to play on my PC. It was an Indiana Jones game. I don't remember the name of it. You probably
Fate
would.
of Atlantis, probably.
Maybe.
Yeah, Indiana Jones and the Fate of the Atlantis is the big fan favorite that everybody still to this day says they should have turned into a movie. I actually have, it's right here from when I owned my video game stores. That's the life-size stand-up painting of Harrison with the MacGuffin in his hand. That's the thing you're chasing in the game, is that thing right there in his hand.
Wow.
And I had somebody make me one for real. That's the thing that he's chasing, and the medallion you use to find it in the Fate of Atlantis game.
Wow. That's incredible. I think yeah, that's pretty much the one that I probably played. I'm just looking at some screenshots, and there was another one that came out after that. maybe in the early 2000s. But anyways, I mean, that's fine. This is
Yeah,
great, man.
the last game out was called Staff of the Kings. That was it. The final entry was and it was out for PSP and Game Boy and all that stuff. And then we haven't had a game since. And they have since announced that they are working on a new video game adventure for him.
Of course they are, because it's going to make them a killer amount of money.
Well,
They know there's an audience, right? So that they will be hoping that people sort of jump on that. Great, man. This is awesome. Unless you have anything else to add, I really appreciate your time, and I really thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and of course the tour of your museum. It was phenomenal.
yeah, I always say that, if you've got questions or you think that something that your audience would be like, but what about, I usually leave it to you guys to decide what you want to ask. I'm an open book and happy to share. So certainly if you have follow-up questions or whatever, by all means. The website, which we brought back to life because there's something worth talking about again with a new film, is throwmetheidol.com. So we've started posting. I don't do rumors, I do news. So if it's factual and it exists, then it ends up on the page. And we don't do spoilers of any kind. When people start saying, well, I heard this happens, or I leave that to other websites. I just cover the facts of, here's what's happening, here's official trailers, here's official merchandise, here's where you can get that merchandise, that it's exclusive to, Target or Walmart, or, to help you in your search of being able to track those treasures down. And I'm always happy to answer people's questions about, hey, I've got this thing and the history behind it or whatever. I'm perfectly happy to help.
No, that's great, man. I'm glad that you are so open and upfront about it. And I would love to talk to you probably as the days get closer to the release date, or maybe even after, just to have another discussion about the film.
Sure, by all means, let's get together as if you want, days after the film opens, and you can see whether I have a happy face or a frowny face on.
Well, I think that I will sort of dictate this. That would be decided more so how many times you've seen the film by then.
Yeah, I mean, I always like there's the first one where you get your first impression, and then there's that second one where it either cements it in, or you start to realize that maybe it was just hype that was getting you excited, or whatever. So yeah, I'll need to see it a couple times before I can know where I for sure stand on it. But I mean, certainly the trailer's making me pretty excited. Lucasfilm always cuts a good trailer that it makes you ask more questions than it answers, and that's, in my opinion, what a good trailer should be.
So yeah, so let's do that, man. Let's do that after the release date, and let's chat and we'll go from there.
Perfect. It was tons of fun. Glad that you reached out, and we'll touch base, I guess, in about 4 or 5 months.